causing autism.
Yeah, and I agree with you. We know that vaccines don't cause autism. The science is clear.
Vaccines don't cause autism.
Is it true, even with that sacred cow of the religion of vaccines, that there is no scientific evidence, or perhaps I should put it this way, is there scientific evidence to suggest that there is no causal link?
We have been beating at public health authorities for 7 years now, demanding the studies that show that the vaccines given in the first 6 months of life do not cause autism. Why are we doing that? We're doing that because when you look at parental surveys of parents with kids with autism, something in the order of 40 to 70% of them, despite the fact that they're constantly being gaslit by health authorities, vaccines do not cause your child's autism. They did not. They still say that vaccines cause their child's autism, still to this day. And what vaccines do they point to? They typically point to the vaccines that we just actually looked at in that chart, right? The 15 injections in the first 6 months of life, and they will often sometimes point to also the MMR vaccine, which is not given any earlier than 1 year of life, okay? And so you would imagine, given that autism can be diagnosed before 1 year of age, before MMR vaccines even given, the parents are saying that vaccines, these are the vaccines that are causing their autism, Hep B vaccine, the meningococcal vaccine, and so forth, that they would have study after study after study showing that those vaccines do not cause autism, right? And I can tell you that that those studies really don't exist. And if I could I'll lay the groundwork on this in the following way. In 1986, when the National Childhood Injury Act was passed, Vaccine Injury Act was passed, it listed the most commonly claimed injuries from vaccination at that time. And it asked the Secretary of Health and Human Services, our federal health authorities here, to study all the existing literature on whether or not the pertussis vaccine, and then it was DTP and it was MMR, the two primary vaccines, caused those conditions. And one of those conditions it asked was whether the pertussis vaccine causes autism. So as early as 1986, parents were claiming that vaccines were causing autism at such a rate that they had it in the law. I can even pull up the statute if you'd like to see it. And, we can look at it. Actually, there's also this great montage that shows them all claiming that vaccines don't cause autism.
We're not sure as a scientific community what causes autism, but we know that vaccines do not.
Vaccines are really the one thing we have looked at.
Deny in any way that we need to do more about autism, but it has nothing to do with vaccines.
Let me be clear. Vaccines do not cause autism.
Vaccines don't cause autism.
Absolutely sure.
Absolutely sure.
Russell, repeat after me. Vaccines do not cause autism. Just keep saying it.
There's no way they can. I've just seen people in so many different outfits. I saw a general, I saw a doctor in scrubs. I've seen people of every pigment saying that vaccines don't cause autism. I'm convinced.
Well, here we are. This is the 1986 Act. This is the law passed in the U.S. that gave the pharma companies immunity. And we can see right here in this section called Review of Pertussis Vaccines and Related Illnesses and Conditions. And it says, no later than 3 years after the effective date of this title, the Secretary of Health and Human Services should complete a review of all relevant medical and scientific information, including a whole long list of stuff, on the nature, circumstance, and extent of the relationship, if any, between vaccines containing pertussis and the following illnesses and conditions, and it lists autism. 1986. Parents claim pertussis vaccine causes autism. So you would think that they would then study it. Well, here is the Institute of Medicine. I'll pull it right up on my screen. Okay, this is the HHS, our federal health authorities, commissioned what was then known as the Institute of Medicine, what is now known as the National Academy of Medicine in America. Well, take a look at what they found. I'll scroll down. This is a chart looking at the question of pertussis vaccine and autism. And you can see on the autism row that there's no checks, there's no X's, meaning they couldn't find any category of evidence to answer the question. There were no human experiments, there were no animal experiments, there were no case control studies, there was nothing. So here we are in 1991, and they say, well, we don't have any evidence. Let's going down to because this is their summary table, and for autism, they said there's no evidence bearing on a causal relationship. There's no studies. They don't know. Fine. Early days, Russell. It's only 1991. Give them a break. Let's not give them too hard of a time yet, okay? It's 1991. Come on. They haven't
Crazy
done it
days,
yet,
crazy
all right?
days. Give them a chance. It's the 90s. Friends
Give 'em
has
a
just
chance.
come out. We've got a lot to think
1991.
about.
Right? You know, they did find evidence that showed that, for example, some vaccines can cause acute arthritis or chronic arthritis. They said the evidence shows it can't cause these, but for autism, we have no idea. All right. Well, let's fast forward then to 2012, 20 years later. The CDC and the agency in our federal government that administers the vaccine program commissioned the Institute of Medicine to again look at what they said were the 158 most commonly claimed injuries from vaccines. And one of the injuries they asked them to look at was, again, whether autism is caused by pertussis vaccine, and this time also diphtheria and tetanus vaccine. So it's been 20 years. 20 years later, okay? It's still one of the most widely claimed injuries from vaccines, not according to me, according to the CDC in the United States of America. They paid the Institute of Medicine a boatload of money to look at this. And you know why they did this, by the way? They wanted to use this report to claim that vaccines don't cause all these various issues, okay? Well, the Institute of Medicine convened a panel of 20-something specialists in every discipline. And here's what they found. They reviewed all the epidemiological evidence. You know what they found? One study, Geyer and Geyer. You know what that study showed? It showed an actual correlation between DTaP vaccine and autism. But the Institute of Medicine threw it out because they said, that's based on VAERS data. That's not reliable. Garbage. Fine. What other study did they find? Zero. Then they looked at the mechanistic evidence. Did they find any? No. So what did they conclude? The evidence is inadequate to accept or reject a causal relationship between diphtheria toxoid, tetanus toxoid, and acellular pertussis-containing vaccines and autism. Okay? So here we are 20 years later. Now you can get upset a little bit. So we're 20 years later, and they still haven't done the study. They still haven't looked at whether pertussis vaccine causes autism, despite the fact it's the most commonly claimed. Now, I know somebody out there is going to say, but you can't prove a negative. Well, in the same report, they looked at whether MMR vaccine caused autism, and they threw out all the studies except 4. And despite the fact that those studies are not really useful because they compare getting like 16 vaccines with 17 vaccines, it's like if I shoot you 16 times and I shoot you 17 times and I say, hey, look, no difference. You died both times. You know, it's not really meaningful. It did conclude MMR vaccine doesn't cause autism. Fine. It shows you can't conclude it. You can do studies, right? They didn't do it for pertussis. And so we said, fine. Maybe the Institute of Medicine doesn't have the study. So I then had an opportunity to depose the world's leading vaccinologist, Stanley Plotkin, in 2018. And I asked him about this exact finding.
This is an excerpt from the IOM's report, right?
Yes.
Can you read the causality conclusion with regard to whether DTaP and TDAP cause autism?
The evidence is inadequate to accept or reject a causal relationship between diphtheria toxoid, tetanus toxoid, or acellular pertussis containing vaccine and autism.
If you don't know whether DTaP or TDAP cause autism, shouldn't you wait until you do know, until you have the science to support it?
Most coffee out there is basically the liquid equivalent of a participation trophy. Bland, mass-produced, utterly forgetful. But peaberry beans, they're not here to play nice. You get yourself that peaberry, you'll grow solo, resulting in a denser, more intense bean that doesn't just follow the herd. These beans are grown at high altitudes and are hand-picked at their peak because if you're going to do something, do it right, yeah? Do them beans right. Thanks to their unique solo act, peaberries deliver richer flavors, a smoother finish, and a touch more caffeine to keep you sharp and focused, like the universe intended. This isn't your corporate coffee sludge. This is for those who see through the nonsense and demand a cup that's as real as it gets. Why settle for anything less than the sweetest peaberries, those rarest among beans? So if you're tired of sipping on mediocrity, go to 1775coffee.com. Use my special code BRAND to get 15% off. Don't just wake up properly to 1775. Revolutionary coffee in the revolution against mediocrity.
If you don't know whether DTaP or TDAP cause autism, shouldn't you wait until you do know, until you have the science to support it, to then say that vaccines do not cause autism?
Do I wait? No, I do not wait, because I have to take into account the health of the child.
And so for that reason, you're okay with telling the parent that DTaP, Tdap does not cause autism, even though the science isn't there yet to support that claim.
Absolutely.
So there you have it from the mouth of the world's leading vaccinologist. He's going to tell you vaccines don't cause autism, even without the science. And if you watch that deposition, which went for 8 hours, where I deposed him on all these issues, what you'll see is that, and this is one of the lores of vaccinology, is that as long as they don't study, as long as there's no study that shows it does or doesn't, like they just don't look at it, they'll say the vaccines don't cause it, even without any data. And that is true. Remember that Institute of Medicine report I told you, they looked at 158 conditions. Well, for over 130 of them, they said, you guys haven't done the science, so we can't give you a causality conclusion. But when you ask vaccinologists about those 130, they'll tell you, oh, vaccines don't cause them, even though there's no study science to support it doesn't. And that's true here with autism. Fine. Okay. 2018, Dr. Stanley Plotkin, in this deposition, again confirming there is no studies, right? He's got none. He's okay with basically, I mean, my kids might call that lying. I don't want to use such a strong term, but let's just say he's not being forthright with these parents if they ask him. We then submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to the CDC. We said, well, maybe the CDC has studies, even though the Institute of Medicine couldn't find them. Maybe the CDC has these studies. So what we did is we submitted a request, and what we said is, can you give us the studies that show that DTaP vaccine don't cause autism? The studies that show that Hep B vaccines don't cause autism, that IPV. We did it for all of the 5 vaccines given 3 times in the first 6 months of life, and we asked for the studies that show cumulatively that they don't cause autism. They should have these available. The website for the CDC says vaccines don't cause autism. They didn't give them. We finally had to sue them. I sued them in federal court on behalf of our client. And after going back and forth with the Department of Justice, which represents the CDC, they finally capitulated, and they finally agreed to provide a list of studies. And I'll pull it up on my screen. I'll show you the court order that has it. This is a federal court order in the United States. Okay, United States District Court, Southern District of New York. Lawsuit was brought by the Institute for Autism Science and Informed Consent Action Network against the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Okay, it's a federal lawsuit, and you can see and this is basically the quote unquote, you could call it a settlement, but it's signed by the judge, so it's an order of the court. And in it summarizes the FOIA requests that were at issue in the lawsuits, because here's what I asked for, what I just described to you, right? All the studies that show that DTaP does not cause autism and so forth, right? You can see them right on the screen. And here it is. The CDC lists 20 studies. These are the 20 studies they say they rely upon, okay? It took forever to litigate. And then at the bottom, before we go to those studies, you can see I signed it on behalf of my client. The Department of Justice signs it on behalf of the CDC, and it was signed by a federal judge, okay?
Yes.
2020. Here's the thing about these 20 studies. Maybe the CDC thought we don't know how to read or we won't read them, but we did. We read them. And 19 of them have nothing to do with any of the vaccines we asked about. They all are about MMR or thimerosal, an ingredient that is not in any of the vaccines we asked about. It was taken out decades ago. There was only one study that involved any of the vaccines we asked about, and it was DTaP vaccine. You know what study they listed? That same 2012 IOM report we just looked at. It said we can't find any studies. So literally the only freaking study out of these 20 that in any way studied whether vaccines cause autism vis-a-vis the vaccines given. I'm going to stop, okay? And then I'm going to stop. I'm doing this because I said nakedly, and I support with the fact that we need that science at my firm, that the post-licensure literature is anemic at best. They don't do it. They say they do it, but they don't do it. And I'm using autism as the way to show you. Now, I'm not trying to say vaccines can cause. I'm not even saying vaccines cause autism. I don't need to prove vaccines are safe. You got to prove. They have to prove it to you, right? That's how informed consent works.
Yeah.
I don't have to prove to you. In any event, they're claiming to you it doesn't cause autism. I'll show you one final 3-minute video, and then I'll stop on this piece. And it's this. It was actually a lawsuit that was involved vaccines and autism. And do you remember that the medical textbook on vaccines you saw on the screen earlier, Plotkin's vaccines? Dr. Catherine Edwards was one of the 4 listed authors. She is one of the world's leading vaccinologists in the world, coming into a deposition with me, knowing about the claim vaccines cause autism. That was the central issue in the case. And so she knows I'm going to ask her about it. So presumably she comes prepared. She's coming prepared for my questions about vaccines and autism and all the vaccines, because all the vaccines were at issue. All the vaccines given in the first 6 months of life were at issue in that case too. So let's see what Dr. Edwards has to say with regards to the state of the science with vaccines and autism, literally out of the mouth from the world's, leading on the market.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So you're highly experienced in conducting clinical trials, correct?
I'm highly experienced conducting clinical trials.
And you're familiar with many of the clinical trials that relied upon to license many of the vaccines currently on the market, correct?
I am.
In your opinion, did the clinical trials relied upon to license the vaccines that Yates received, many of which are still on the market today, were they designed to rule out that the vaccine causes autism?
No. You badgered me into answering the question the way you want me to, but I think that that's probably the answer.
Is that your accurate, truthful testimony?
Yes.
In the expert disclosures for this case, it asserts that, among other things, you will testify that, quote,
गेट खोलिए दादा बंद कर गेट है बंद कर बनवा रहा ये ठीक है नहीं कोई काम करेगा नहीं ले चल सुन लिया गए बढ़ाना ला एक और जैसी मैन कौन सा ला कौन ला लिया के यार आदमी जिंदगी में ज्यादा काम कर जिंदगी में पूरा का देख भी है जा चल तो ये नहीं आवाज आई दिखा दिखा रुक जा sudah Kurti gini, kurti.
Kurti ada ya. Ini apa sih? Udah balik lagi.